He cheated on me with my cousin. I bought her dream house with his money. The words replay in my mind like a twisted mantra as I stand on the perfectly manicured lawn, watching the realtor hammer the sold sign into the ground. My revenge served not cold, but with the warm satisfaction of architectural perfection. 3 months ago, I wouldn't have recognized myself in this moment. The woman who smiles at the realtor with practiced charm while calculating exactly how long it will take for James to discover what I've done with his inheritance. The woman who just spent $1.2 million of her soon-to-be ex-husband's money to purchase the Victorian mansion my cousin Eliza has coveted since childhood. The money transfer completed this morning. The paperwork signed with a steady hand that betrayed none of the turmoil beneath my skin. Now I just wait for the inevitable explosion when they both realize what I've done. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand the full magnitude of my revenge, you need to know how it began. I found out on a Tuesday. There's something particularly cruel about discovering your life is a lie on an ordinary weekday. Tuesday afternoons are supposed to be about grocery shopping and returning emails, not finding your husband's secret text messages while looking for the password to our shared Netflix account. My first thought was that I'd misunderstood something. The texts between James and Eliza couldn't possibly mean what they seemed to mean. My husband of 8 years and my cousin who'd been my bridesmaid. There had to be an explanation that wouldn't shatter my world into jagged pieces. But there wasn't. The physical symptoms hit first. A hollow feeling spreading through my chest like ice water, my lungs forgetting how to draw breath, my fingertips going numb against the cool glass of James's phone screen. Then the heat of humiliation crawling up my neck, burning my cheeks as I scrolled through message after message, each one more intimate than the last. 2 months. They'd been sleeping together for 2 months, meeting at hotels when James was supposedly working late, planning rendezvous during family gatherings, laughing about how oblivious I was. I remember setting the phone down with unnatural care, as if it might detonate if handled roughly. The kitchen counter felt too solid beneath my palms as I leaned against it, trying to ground myself in something real when everything else had just revealed itself to be fiction. I didn't confront him that night. Something cold and calculating had awakened in me, something that whispered to wait, to watch, to gather more information before showing my hand. So I greeted him with the same kiss I always did, swallowing my revulsion when his lips met mine, knowing where they had been. Over dinner, I studied him like a specimen under glass. James chatted about his day at the investment firm, complained about his assistant's incompetence, asked about my plans for the weekend, all while texting Eliza under the table, his eyes occasionally flicking down, his lips curving into that small secret smile I now understood wasn't meant for me. I nodded in all the right places, my mind racing ahead, mentally cataloging our assets, our accounts, our life together. The inheritance he'd received from his grandmother 3 months ago, nearly $2 million sitting in a separate account with both our names on it. The account I rarely checked because James handled our finances, the money he'd been promising to use for our future, for the family we'd been talking about starting. That night, I lay beside him in bed, listening to his breathing deepen into sleep, and I felt myself splitting in two. The woman I had been, trusting, loving, perhaps a little naive, was dying a silent death. And someone new was taking her place, someone with ice in her veins and fire in her heart. The next day, I called in sick to work and began my research. I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with, exactly what my options were. I started with their text messages, methodically documenting dates, times, locations. I took screenshots and emailed them to myself. Evidence. Then I dove into our finances. James had always insisted on managing our money. "You hate numbers," he'd say with that indulgent smile. "Let me handle this." And I had let him, believing it was an act of love rather than control. But I didn't hate numbers. I'd simply allowed myself to become the woman he wanted me to be, slightly helpless, dependent on his expertise. The truth was, before we married, I'd been halfway through an accounting degree. I'd set it aside when his career took off, when he convinced me that his income would be enough for both of us. Now, I methodically untangled our financial web: joint checking, savings, investment accounts, credit cards, property, and of course the inheritance. I discovered that while he'd put both our names on the inheritance account initially, probably for tax purposes, he'd recently been siphoning money from it into a private account I hadn't known existed. Planning his exit strategy, perhaps? Or just funding his affair with my cousin? Either way, I had work to do. For the next week, I lived a double life. On the surface, I was the same devoted wife I'd always been. I made his favorite meals, listened to his stories, feigned interest in his day. But beneath that mask, I was plotting. Meeting with a divorce attorney who had a reputation for being a shark. Opening new accounts in my name only. Documenting everything. The hardest part was facing my family, knowing that Eliza would be at my parents' Sunday dinner. My mother had always doted on her sister's daughter, impressed by Eliza's glamorous job in real estate and her seemingly perfect life. The only thing Eliza didn't have was the house she'd always wanted, the historic Victorian on Maple Street that had been her obsession since we were children. "When I make it big, I'm buying that house," she'd declare every time we passed it. "It's my dream home." I remembered this as I sat across from her at my parents' dining table, watching her laugh with my mother, watching her eyes flicker to James when she thought no one was looking. The pain that shot through me was almost unbearable, but I channeled it into resolve, into planning. I excused myself early, claiming a headache. James stayed behind, of course. "You go rest, honey. I'll catch a ride home later." The concern in his eyes almost looked genuine. I wondered if he actually believed I suspected nothing, or if lying had simply become second nature to him. That night, alone in our house, I made my decision. A normal divorce would be too clean, too simple for what they'd done to me. I needed something that would strike at both of them, something that would leave a more permanent mark than just a legal separation. The idea came to me as I was scrolling through old family photos, torturing myself with images of happier times. There was Eliza, standing in front of that Victorian house during one of our childhood walks, pointing up at the ornate turret, her face alight with longing. "Someday," she'd said, "not if I had anything to do with it." The next morning, I checked the real estate listings. The Victorian wasn't on the market, hadn't been for years. But that didn't mean it couldn't be for sale. Everything has a price. I called in a favor from a college friend who had gone into high-end real estate. "I'm looking for a specific property," I explained. "It's not listed, but I want to make an offer the owners can't refuse." 2 days later, she called back. "The owners might consider selling for the right price. They're getting older, thinking about downsizing." "What's your number?" I thought about the inheritance account, about the $1.8 million that remained after James's skimming, about how divorce proceedings could freeze those assets, how a court battle could divide them. $1.2 million? I said, my voice steady despite the hammering of my heart. "Cash. And I need to move fast." My friend whistled. "That'll get their attention. Let me make some calls." While she worked on that, I contacted my attorney. "I need to make a large purchase before filing for divorce," I explained. "Is that going to be a problem?" He asked several pointed questions, then laid out a strategy. Since both our names were on the inheritance account, I had every legal right to access those funds. But timing would be crucial. If I withdrew the money right before filing for divorce, it could look like I was hiding assets. If I waited until after filing, the account might be frozen. "Make your purchase," he advised. "Then wait 3 weeks before filing. Keep detailed records of where the money went. We'll argue it was a legitimate investment property purchased during the marriage." Perfect. The next few days passed in a blur of paperwork and secret meetings. The owners of the Victorian accepted my offer. Apparently, $1.2 million in cash was indeed enough to persuade them to part with their beloved home. My friend fast-tracked the process, calling in favors with inspectors and title companies to move things along. Meanwhile, at home, I maintained my facade of normalcy. James remained oblivious, too caught up in his affair to notice the subtle changes in me. Or perhaps he simply didn't care enough to look closely. I found myself studying him during quiet moments. The man I had loved for nearly a decade, the man I had built my life around. Now a stranger wearing a familiar face. Had he ever truly loved me? Or had I just been convenient, reliable, easily managed? These thoughts no longer brought tears, only a cold determination that frightened me a little. I was becoming someone new, someone forged in betrayal and tempered by rage. And strangely, I didn't mind this transformation. This new version of me was proving far more capable than the woman who had once defined herself as James's wife. The day I transferred the money from our joint account, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The bank manager raised an eyebrow at the amount, but processed the transaction without comment. I walked out with a cashier's check that represented the largest purchase I'd ever make, and the first step in my revenge. That evening, James noticed nothing unusual. He came home late, as had become his habit, with the faint scent of Eliza's perfume clinging to his clothes. I served dinner and listened to his lies about a client meeting running long. I smiled and nodded and plotted. 3 days later, I signed the final paperwork and received the keys to the Victorian. The original owners had already moved to their new condo, leaving the historic home empty and waiting. I drove by slowly, looking up at the turrets and gables, the wraparound porch, the stained glass windows. Eliza's dream home, now mine. I hadn't decided yet what I would do with it. Sell it to someone else? Rent it out? Move in myself? The point wasn't to own it. The point was to make sure Eliza never would. A week passed, then 2. James remained unaware of what I'd done, though the bank statement would arrive soon. I waited, watching him like a scientist observing a lab rat before the experiment begins. In the meantime, I methodically prepared for the divorce. I copied important documents, photographed our possessions, met with my attorney to finalize our strategy. I packed a small bag with essentials and stored it in my car trunk, ready for the moment when everything would explode. The fuse was lit on a Friday afternoon. I was at work when my phone buzzed with a text from James. "What did you do?" Just 3 hours later than I'd expected. The bank must have called him about the unusual withdrawal. I didn't respond. More texts followed, increasingly frantic and angry. I watched them appear on my screen with a detached fascination. The calm at the center of me remained undisturbed, even as my heart rate quickened. It was beginning. I left work early but didn't go home. Instead, I drove to the Victorian, let myself in with my new keys, and waited in the empty living room. The afternoon sun streamed through the stained glass windows, casting jewel-toned patterns across the hardwood floors. The house creaked and settled around me, a century of history in its bones. My phone continued to buzz. James calling now, leaving voicemails that grew progressively more threatening. I listened to each one, noting the progression from confusion to rage. In the last one, his voice had a dangerous edge I'd never heard before. "I know you're behind this. When I find you..." He didn't finish the threat. He didn't need to. I turned off my phone and waited. He would figure out where I was eventually. He would come here to confront me. And then I would tell him everything I knew. The confrontation, when it came, was even more satisfying than I'd imagined. The sound of tires screeching outside, the heavy footsteps on the porch, the front door flying open with such force it slammed against the wall. James standing in the doorway, his face contorted with fury, a vein pulsing in his forehead. "What the hell have you done?" he shouted, his voice echoing in the empty house. I remained seated on the window bench, my hands folded calmly in my lap. "I bought a house." "With my money?" He stalked toward me, stopping just short of where I sat. $1.2 million. Are you out of your mind? I looked up at him, studying the man I'd once loved with the detached interest of an entomologist examining a particularly unpleasant species of insect. "Our money?" I corrected. "The inheritance account has both our names on it. That money was for our future." I couldn't help the laugh that escaped me. "Our future? The future where you're sleeping with my cousin? That future?" The color drained from his face so quickly I thought he might faint. His mouth opened, closed, opened again, but no sound emerged. I watched the calculations happening behind his eyes. How much did I know? How long had I known it? What was the best lie to tell? "I don't know what you're talking about," he finally managed, but his voice had lost its conviction. "Please don't insult my intelligence on top of everything else." I took out my phone, opened the folder of screenshots I'd compiled. "Would you like to see the texts? The hotel receipts? The security camera footage from the lobby of the Westbrook Hotel 3 weeks ago? I have it all, James." He stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. Perhaps he was. The woman he'd married, the compliant, trusting woman who believed his every word, no longer existed. "So this is... what? Revenge?" he asked, gesturing around at the empty house. "You spend my inheritance on a house we don't need to get back at me for an affair. Not just any house." I smiled, enjoying the moment more than I probably should have. "Do you recognize it?" Eliza certainly would. "It's the Victorian on Maple Street. Her dream home. The one she's talked about buying ever since we were children." I watched comprehension dawn on his face, followed quickly by horror. "You didn't." "I did." I stood up, smoothing down my skirt. "I bought my cousin's dream house with your money. And now neither of you will ever have it." He took a step back, as if physically repelled by what I'd done. "You've lost your mind." "No. I've found myself." I walked past him toward the front door. "I've also found an excellent divorce attorney. You'll be hearing from him on Monday." "You think you're going to get away with this?" His voice had that dangerous edge again. "The courts will make you sell this place." They'll see it for exactly what it is, you trying to hide assets before a divorce. I turned to face him one last time. Maybe. But while that legal battle plays out, and my attorney thinks it could take years, this house will be in my name. Not yours. And certainly not Eliza's. And every day that passes, she'll know that her dream home is owned by the cousin she betrayed. The look on his face in that moment, confusion mixed with a dawning respect and fear, was something I'll cherish forever. You can tell her yourself, I added, stepping onto the porch. I assume you'll be calling her as soon as I leave. I'd love to be a fly on the wall for that conversation. I walked to my car without looking back, my footsteps sure and steady on the flagstone path. Inside, my emotions churned like a storm-tossed sea. Grief for what I'd lost, rage at their betrayal, fear of the uncertain future ahead. But beneath it all ran a current of something that felt strangely like freedom. The legal battle was exactly as messy as I'd anticipated. James fought tooth and nail to force the sale of the Victorian, arguing that I'd made the purchase maliciously and with the intent to deprive him of his rightful share of our marital assets. My attorney counter-argued that the house was an investment property purchased during our marriage with funds to which I had legal access. The fact that the particular property might cause distress to the woman my husband had been sleeping with was merely coincidental. The judge seemed skeptical of both arguments. Meanwhile, the family drama exploded in spectacular fashion. My mother called hysterical after Eliza confessed everything. "How could you do this to your cousin?" she demanded, apparently more concerned about the house than about what Eliza had done to me. "The same way she could sleep with my husband," I replied calmly before hanging up. My father was more understanding. He showed up at my apartment. I'd moved out the day after confronting James, with takeout and a bottle of whiskey. "Your mother will come around," he said as we sat on my balcony, watching the city lights come on. "She's just in shock." "I'm not sure I want her to come around." The whiskey burned pleasantly going down, warming me from the inside out. Anyone who thinks a house is more important than what they did to me isn't someone I need in my life right now. He nodded slowly. "Fair enough." Then, after a long pause, "Was it worth it?" "The house, I mean." I considered the question. The legal fees were mounting. The family was in tatters. I'd lost not only my husband, but potentially my relationship with my mother as well. But I'd also found a strength in myself I hadn't known existed. I'd stood up against betrayal instead of crumbling beneath it. I'd transformed from victim to avenger. "Yes," I said finally, "it was worth it." What I didn't tell him was that I'd already found a solution to the legal standoff, one that would ensure my revenge remained intact while also securing my financial future. The next day, I met with a real estate developer who specialized in historic properties. The Victorian, it turned out, was in a prime location for a boutique hotel. The zoning would need to be changed, but my developer friend had connections on the city council. He was confident it could be done. "I can offer you $1.5 million now," he said across the lunch table. "Or a 20% stake in the hotel once it's operational. Your choice." I chose the stake in the hotel. Not just because it would likely be more profitable in the long run, but because it meant the Victorian would be transformed into something Eliza could never have. Her dream home would become a business, open to anyone with the money to stay there. When I presented this solution to the court, even James's attorney couldn't find much to object to. The house would be converted to a commercial property, with the resulting profits split according to the divorce settlement. The fact that this arrangement would permanently remove any possibility of Eliza ever living in her dream home was, as my attorney put it, an unfortunate coincidence. The judge approved the plan. 2 weeks later, I stood on the sidewalk opposite the Victorian, watching as the construction crews began the renovations that would transform it into the Maple Street Inn. Beside me stood my developer partner, pointing out where the new additions would be, how they would maintain the historic character while adding modern amenities. I was only half listening, my attention caught by a familiar car slowing as it passed. Eliza's red BMW. She stared at me through the window, her face a mask of hatred before accelerating away. Let her hate me. Her feelings were no longer my concern. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. I received half of our assets, including half the remaining money from the inheritance account and a 10% stake in the hotel, the other 10% going to James. It wasn't the financial windfall it might have been if I'd simply filed for divorce without my revenge plan, but it was enough. More importantly, I'd reclaimed myself. The woman who walked out of the courthouse that day bore little resemblance to the trusting wife who had discovered those text messages a year earlier. I was harder now, more cautious but also more confident. I knew what I was capable of when pushed to my limits. James and Eliza didn't last, of course. Their relationship, built on deceit and betrayal, collapsed under the weight of the scandal and the financial fallout from our divorce. Last I heard, he'd moved to Seattle to start over. She still lived in town, working at the same real estate agency, showing other people their dream homes, while the one she'd always wanted served mimosas to tourists and hosted wedding receptions in its garden. The Maple Street Inn opened 18 months after I discovered James's betrayal. I attended the grand opening, sipping champagne in what had once been the formal living room, now an elegant lobby with the original fireplace and woodwork meticulously restored. A young couple approached the reception desk, the woman gazing around in wonder at the stained glass windows and ornate ceiling medallions. "This place is amazing," she said to her partner. "It's like something out of a fairy tale." I smiled into my champagne flute. If it was a fairy tale, it wasn't the kind with a traditional happy ending. No prince had saved me. No magical intervention had restored what was lost. Instead, I'd written my own ending, one where the princess saves herself, claims the castle, and transforms it into a profitable business. Not quite happily ever after, perhaps, but satisfying in its own way. As I wandered through the beautifully renovated rooms of what had once been Eliza's dream house, I felt the last of my anger finally begin to fade. In its place was something quieter, more settled. Not happiness exactly, but a certain peace. He had cheated on me with my cousin, and I had bought her dream house with his money. The revenge that had consumed me for so long was complete. Now it was time to discover who I would become next. I stepped out onto the Victorians' wraparound porch as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the lawn where the sold sign had once stood. The evening air was cool against my skin, a gentle reminder that seasons change, wounds heal, life continues. I took a deep breath and walked down the steps, away from the past and toward whatever awaited me next.